Welcome to this deep dive. I'm so thrilled to have you with us today because we are looking at an absolutely massive stack of intelligence memos, financial reports, academic grants, and global news dispatches.
It's a lot.
It really is. We've basically got our hands on a curated dossier of open source intelligence that reads like a classified briefing. And the sheer volume of what we have to get through today is just staggering. We're talking about uncovering the hidden wiring of the global economy and the geopolitical landscape.
Right. It really is a remarkable collection of sources. We're looking at everything from front-page kinetic conflicts in the Middle East to obscure, highly technical medical research grants buried in NIH databases.
Yeah.
And the real value here isn't just in reading these isolated reports, it's in doing the forensic work to connect the dots between them.
Exactly. And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are hunting for what we call the second-order effects of the news. We want to show you how a drone strike in the Gulf doesn't just stay in the Gulf. It fundamentally alters the cost of the groceries you buy next month.
It trickles down.
It does. We're going to look at how a college student's smartphone app might be manipulating global sentiment, and how a change in a massive legacy bank's IT policy over in London could spark an absolute regulatory crisis that ripples across the entire financial sector. Everything we are looking at today is connected, and we're going to trace those invisible threads for you.
The underlying theme of our SAC today really is volatility. I mean, we are looking at escalating geopolitical conflicts, specifically the rapidly expanding U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran.
Yeah.
We are tracking the sudden balkanization of the global AI supply chain. We've got a wild, completely unregulated gold rush in prediction markets that are aggressively targeting college campuses. And finally, we'll examine some frontier breakthroughs in gene therapy and genomic AI that are poised to completely redefine modern medicine.
And potentially bankrupt traditional pharmaceutical models in the process.
Exactly.
Now, before we get into the weeds, we need to talk about the nature of this intel. We're looking at some highly polarized, highly charged events today.
Very charged.
Right. This includes the ongoing U.S.-Israeli conflict with Iran, the specific aggressive rhetoric being utilized by the Trump administration, and the abrupt firing of high-profile U.S. political figures. Our goal here isn't to take a political stance or tell you who is right or who is wrong.
No.
We are not taking any sides, endorsing any viewpoints, or making any political judgments. Our mission is strictly to impartially report the factual content contained in these sources and analyze their cascading impacts. Our job is to strip away the partisan noise, look purely at the data, and show you exactly how these events map out on the global board.
That is the only way to do this kind of analysis effectively. We have to act as a neutral lens. We're analyzing the market signals, the intelligence reports, and the raw data to understand the mechanics of what is happening, entirely devoid of any partisan bias. If you let bias in, you misread the risk.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving straight into the geopolitical shockwave and what financial insiders in our memos are calling the repricing of risk.
It's a massive repricing.
Massive. The core conflict right now is the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, and the ripple effects are causing structural disruptions. We have to look at the Strait of Hormuz. For anyone tracking global logistics, this is the ultimate maritime choke point. Roughly 20% of the total global oil supply travels through this incredibly narrow stretch of water. And right now,
It's virtually paralyzed.
Paralyzed.
The disruption isn't just a hypothetical threat anymore, it's a profound operational reality. The intelligence details how Iranian drone strikes have systematically hit critical energy infrastructure across the Gulf in retaliation. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura oil refinery was struck.
And that's not a small facility?
Not at all. Ras Tanura is one of the oldest and largest refineries in the Middle East. It's effectively the beating heart of Saudi export capability. The strike forced an immediate, indefinite shutdown. And gets worse on the natural gas side. We have confirmed reports of drones hitting Qatar's Ras Laffan plant.
Ras Laffan is a monster. That single plant accounts for almost a fifth of all global liquefied natural gas, or LNG, production, right?
It does. And the structural damage was significant enough that Qatar Energy actually had to declare force majeure.
Which is essentially the corporate equivalent of pulling the ripcord.
Yes.
They're legally waving a white flag telling all their global buyers, hey, an extreme event outside of our control is stopping us from fulfilling our contracts, so don't sue us when your gas doesn't show up.
And you can imagine how the global markets digested that. The reaction has been incredibly violent. U.S. crude oil prices shot up nearly 20% almost immediately after the conflict escalated to this level.
20%.
Right. But the fascinating part of the intelligence isn't just the price spike. It's the logistical nightmare compounding behind the scenes. Look at Iraq. They are facing a scenario right now where they might have to cut their oil output by over 50%.
Not because they don't have the capacity to pump it.
Exactly. Not because they can't pump it, but because the physics of the supply chain have broken down. They literally have nowhere to put the oil. Their onshore storage facilities are hitting absolute maximum capacity. Because the Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed to standard commercial traffic, the MPVLCCs, very large crude carriers, they can't get in to load the crude and relieve that storage pressure.
But wait, amidst all this paralysis, where almost every major shipping operator is hiding out in safe waters, dropping anchor, and waiting for the dust to settle, you have these rogue operators. The sources specifically highlight a Greek billionaire named George Procopio.
Yes.
His company, Dynacom Tankers, is doing the exact opposite of the broader market. He is actively sending his massive vessels like the crude tanker Athena and the Boris Sokolov straight into the absolute hottest zones of the conflict.
What's fascinating here is how risk appetite wildly bifurcates in a crisis. The broader market, the institutional players, the pension funds, they're currently pricing in the pause in global shipping. They see the halted traffic, the paralyzed supply chains, the burning refineries.
Yeah.
But they're entirely failing to price in the massive windfall profits of the risk takers who are stepping into that void.
The people actually making the run.
Exactly. Procopio is capitalizing on the fact that freight rates for this specific route have more than doubled, and in some spot markets tripled since the conflict began. If you are willing to make that run, a single VLCC making that perilous journey through the Gulf can generate roughly $500,000 a day in revenue right now.
$500,000 a day.
A single day.
And to pull that off, the reports note they are sending these massive ships into the strait with their transponders turned completely off. They're essentially running dark, operating like ghost ships to avoid being digitally targeted while Iranian missiles and drones are literally flying overhead.
It's incredibly dangerous.
It is, and the contrast of Procopio himself is what gets me. The maritime intelligence profiles him not as some slick corporate raider, but as this unassuming guy in his late 70s. He walks around Athens without a security detail, wears a faded baseball cap, and drives an old, beat-up Mercedes SUV. Yet he is orchestrating these insanely high-stakes maneuvers, capturing what industry insiders quietly and euphemistically refer to as premium business.
Premium business.
Right. There's a quote from him in the Dossier from a few years ago that feels incredibly prescient. He said, "If you are not a risk taker, you are not in shipping. If you don't want the risks, you buy U.S. bonds."
It perfectly encapsulates the extreme edges of the maritime industry. But there's a deeper macroeconomic layer here. If we look at the financial intelligence memos from the energy desks, the analysts are pointing out that this isn't just a transient, temporary spike in shipping rates that will vanish when a ceasefire is signed.
It's structural.
Yes. High-risk players in the tanker space, publicly traded companies with tickers like STNG and FRO, are experiencing massive windfalls that are fundamentally repairing their balance sheets. The intelligence suggests we might be entering a multi-year tanker supercycle.
A super cycle, meaning this elevated pricing is going to become the new normal for a while.
Precisely. This is driven by a confluence of factors that the conflict is merely accelerating. We have an aging global tanker fleet, a massive backlog at the shipyards, meaning a lack of new ships being built over the next 3 to 5 years, and what could be permanent, structural shifts in global trade routes as countries permanently diversify away from the Middle East.
Wow.
So the current stock prices of these tanker companies might look like a cyclical peak to the average retail investor, but the contrarian institutional view is that they are establishing a new, much higher baseline for the decade.
It's incredible. And it's not just the oceans that are an absolute mess right now. The skies are just as chaotic. The aviation ripple effect detailed in these dispatches is staggering. Because of separate drone attacks on Azerbaijan, which Western intelligence has firmly blamed on Iran, the entire southern airspace corridor is closed.
Completely shut down.
Now, keep in mind, Western airlines are already banned from Russian airspace due to the Ukraine conflict, and now they have to completely avoid the Middle East. So almost all of the Europe to Asia commercial air travel is being squeezed into this unbelievably tiny 50-mile wide corridor over the northern tip of Azerbaijan.
The operational friction this creates for legacy carriers is immense. Airlines like Air France, KLM, and Lufthansa are facing crushing margin pressures. This rerouting means significantly longer flight times. Longer flight times mean vastly increased fuel consumption, and aviation fuel is already trading at a premium.
Right.
In some of the more extreme cases on these routes, airlines are actually having to artificially cap the number of passengers they carry.
Wait, they're leaving people behind.
Yes. They are leaving paying customers at the gate just to ensure the aircraft is physically light enough to carry the massive amount of extra fuel required for these massive geopolitical detours. Qantas has even had to add a mandatory refueling stop in Singapore for its flagship London-to-Perth route, entirely breaking their direct flight marketing model.
But again, just like in the shipping industry, one company's operational nightmare is another's golden opportunity. Look at Turkish Airlines. The reports highlight how perfectly positioned they are right now. Because their massive mega hub is in Istanbul, situated right on the edge of Europe and Asia, they don't have to rely on that squeezed 50-mile corridor in the same way.
They can bypass a bottleneck.
Exactly. They can seamlessly capture all this rerouted, frustrated traffic, turning this massive geopolitical chaos into a historic market share gain against their Gulf-based rivals like Emirates and Qatar Airways, who are currently facing massive groundings and airspace restrictions.
It's a textbook example of geographic arbitrage in a time of crisis. Turkish Airlines is monetizing their latitude and longitude.
So, why should you, the listener, care about a Greek shipping magnate dodging missiles in the dark, or flight paths being squeezed over Azerbaijan? Think of the global economy as a giant geographic funnel. When these massive supply chain choke points happen, whether it's the Strait of Hormuz or a 50-mile slice of airspace, it creates a restriction at the top of the funnel that inevitably trickles down directly to your wallet.
Directly to the consumer.
And it's not just the obvious things like the price of gas at the pump. A huge portion of the world's fertilizer components, things like urea and sulfur, are exported from the Gulf. When those bulk shipments are disrupted or delayed, the cost for a farmer in the Midwest to grow a bushel of corn skyrockets. So that distant, complex conflict eventually hits you right at the grocery store checkout line in the form of stickier, long-term inflation. You are paying the premium for Procopius risk.
And what's crucial to understand is that physical conflict in the Gulf is intimately mirrored by political disruption and the information war happening domestically. The sources detail some incredibly significant shakeups within the U.S. administration that are directly tied to how this crisis is being managed. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has been fired.
This was a massive political earthquake. For context, the Department of Homeland Security isn't just Border Patrol. It oversees sprawling agencies, Customs and Border Protection, ICE, FEMA, the Coast Guard, even the Secret Service. It's a massive portfolio.
Huge.
The internal memos indicate she faced a fierce public backlash over the administration's aggressive mass deportation efforts, but the firing was really triggered by swirling internal allegations of chaotic leadership and the misuse of public funds. The sources specifically highlight a series of highly controversial behaviors that eroded her political capital.
The optics were terrible.
Yeah, like doing a stylized photo shoot wearing a luxury Rolex watch inside a notorious high-security Salvadoran prison, and a disastrous, highly combative Senate hearing where lawmakers relentlessly grilled her about her past decision to shoot her family's dog, a deeply controversial story she inexplicably chose to include in her own political memoir.
The optics became a liability. To replace her, the president has nominated Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma. But this internal shakeup at DHS is occurring simultaneously with a hyper-aggressive, almost unprecedented messaging strategy coming out of the White House regarding the actual kinetic war in Iran. The rhetoric is escalating rapidly. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has been using highly provocative language in his briefings.
Yeah, he was openly boasting of sheer destruction.
Exactly, stating point-blank that U.S. adversaries are toast, emphasizing repeatedly that the U.S. military has only just begun to hunt.
And it's not isolated to Hegseth. It seems to be a coordinated communication strategy. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated unequivocally from the podium that Iran's leaders are paying in blood. This is such a stark contrast to the traditional sober tone usually taken by top military brass during an active conflict. Look at General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
A very different approach.
Entirely different. His statements in the dossier are focused strictly on the dry, operational details of the strikes munitions used, targets hit, battle damage assessments. He is actively avoiding the inflammatory rhetoric.
This divergence in rhetoric reflects what some policy insiders in our stack are calling the no Phase 2 plan approach. If we look historically, U.S. foreign policy, particularly around the time of the Iraq War in 2003, was heavily guided by what was colloquially known as the Pottery Barn Rule.
You break it, you own it.
Exactly. The doctrine, championed by figures like Colin Powell, implied a deep, long-term responsibility for post-conflict reconstruction, governance, and nation-building. The current administration's strategy, however, seemingly embraces disruption as an end goal in itself, without any commitment to the owning it phase. The intelligence sources note that the administration is entirely content to destroy the military capability and let the local populations or regional neighbors deal with the immense geopolitical and humanitarian fallout of the strikes.
Meanwhile, as the U.S. drops conventional munitions, Iran is fighting a parallel, highly asymmetric information war, and it is incredibly sophisticated. They aren't just relying on old-school state TV broadcasts. They are deploying advanced, state-run media operations heavily augmented by AI-generated deepfakes.
It's a flood of disinformation.
They are actively projecting a meticulously crafted image of absolute military success and domestic resilience, despite taking heavy, verifiable losses on the ground. They are flooding social media platforms with unproven, highly viral claims of devastating retaliatory strikes on Tel Aviv and major U.S. naval assets in the region.
And this is where the geopolitical strategy intersects with technology. Iran's aggressive use of AI propaganda is designed to accelerate the degradation of trust in global media. It intentionally creates a deeply contested, muddy information environment. For financial markets trying to price risk or for policymakers trying to calibrate a response, it becomes incredibly difficult to quickly assess the actual ground truth on the battlefield. When the barrier to entry for state-sponsored disinformation is lowered to zero by cheap, highly convincing generative AI, ambiguity reigns supreme.
And in global markets, ambiguity breeds intense volatility. Here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just Iran playing the media game. The White House itself recently posted a video on social media set to a viral patriotic country song that actually seemed to seamlessly intercut real, classified military footage of F-35 fighter jets and kinetic missile strikes.
With video game footage.
Yes, with high-definition rendering from a commercial video game featuring mass-guided bombs. They are blurring the lines between actual combat and digital entertainment. Modern asymmetric warfare is clearly no longer just about the payload of actual munitions. It relies just as heavily on driving viral social media narratives and the active gamification of violence to secure domestic support.
The intelligence dossier also points out a critical structural vulnerability for the Iranian regime that isn't central to Tehran, but rather on its edges. The real existential threat to the current government might be a collapse on the periphery. Iran has historically restive, marginalized border provinces populated by large ethnic minorities, the Kurds in the northwest, the Azeris and the Baluchis in the southeast. If the central government and the IRGC are sufficiently weakened by these continuous U.S. and Israeli strikes, it could create a massive domestic security vacuum.
The sources explicitly mention that heavily armed separatist groups, like the Kurdish PJA, could exploit this vacuum, potentially fracturing the country and turning Iran into what analysts call a patchwork republic of warring factions. So, for you listening to this, it emphasizes exactly why it is so crucial to rely on high-signal verified intelligence.
Absolutely.
In an era where state-sponsored AI deepfakes can flood your social media feeds in seconds, global markets and even diplomatic responses can be manipulated in minutes, you have to aggressively question the authenticity of the digital narratives you're consuming, because the people generating them have a vested interest in your reaction.
That concept of technological manipulation brings us directly to a pivotal shift in global policy, which perfectly bridges the gap between physical military infrastructure and the algorithms driving the information war. We need to examine the new Fortress America AI moat and the rapidly escalating ethics of war tech.
The chip war.
The chip wars. The U.S. Commerce Department is currently floating draft rules that are sending shockwaves through Silicon Valley. These rules would strictly tie the export of high-end AI chips, the incredibly powerful GPUs from companies like NVIDIA and AMD, to mandatory pledges of foreign direct investment into U.S. domestic AI infrastructure.
The mainstream narrative coming out of the Commerce Department paints this as just a diplomatic formalization of trade deals with wealthy allies like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Sort of, we'll sell you the chips if you play nice. But the intelligence sources we have suggest this is a smokescreen for a much harder-line, aggressive techno-nationalist policy.
It's much deeper than diplomacy.
We are already seeing the effects. NVIDIA has reportedly halted the production of specific, slightly downgraded chips that were designed specifically to comply with previous export controls for the Chinese market. They are looking at the landscape and betting that these regulatory walls are not temporary, they are permanent. This new policy isn't just about recycling petrodollars. It is about building a massive, highly secure, domestic agentic AI ecosystem and effectively forcing allied nations to onshore their sovereign wealth capital to the United States if they want any access to the best compute power on Earth.
This raises an important question about the kinetic reality of the cloud, a reality we've touched on with the strikes in the Gulf. We have been conditioned to think of AI and the cloud as this ethereal, borderless, untouchable thing. It just exists up there. But the intelligence completely shatters that illusion. It confirms that Iranian proxy forces actively targeted major Amazon and Microsoft cloud computing facilities located in the Gulf with explosive drone strikes.
It's a physical vulnerability.
Physical data centers are now confirmed, high-value military targets in regional conflicts. This entirely ends the era of tech neutrality.
I think people forget what the cloud actually is. A data center isn't a magical hard drive in the sky. It is a massive, sprawling concrete warehouse filled with thousands of servers that requires astronomical amounts of water for cooling and electricity to run. And the public is really starting to push back on this massive resource consumption, especially in areas facing power grid stress or water shortages.
The environmental impact is huge.
In fact, the sources note a really telling moment. President Trump recently held a meeting with top AI executives and explicitly told them they need PR help to manage the growing, localized backlash against data center construction in rural America.
And within this rapidly fortifying Fortress America, there is a profound, almost philosophical, ethical battle playing out between the tech sector and the military-industrial complex. The Pentagon recently took an unprecedented step. They designated Anthropic, which is widely considered one of the leading AI safety and research labs, as an official supply chain risk.
A supply chain risk, that's a heavy label.
This massive escalation stems from a bitter, behind-the-scenes dispute over the potential use of Anthropic's flagship Claude AI model in lethal autonomous weapon systems and mass domestic surveillance programs. Anthropic's CEO, Dario Amodei, drew a hard line in the sand. He absolutely refused to cross what he called these ethical red lines, leading the Defense Department to threaten sweeping, punitive action that would bar Anthropic from any military or federal supply chains.
It got incredibly heated. Amodei actually sent an internal memo to his employees that subsequently leaked to the press, where he flat out accused the Pentagon of telling straight-up lies about Anthropic's capabilities and intentions. Now, the Pentagon did later quietly walk back and narrow the scope of the ban to apply only to direct contracts with the Department of Defense, rather than the entire federal government. But the damage is done.
The lines are drawn.
It's a massive public showdown. What we are seeing is the entire AI industry actively fracturing into two distinct camps. You have the ethically constrained camp, led by companies like Anthropic, who are apparently willing to walk away from billions in lucrative government contracts to maintain their safety guardrails. And then you have the defense-aligned camp.
Right.
Now, companies like Palantir have always built their entire business model around defense and intelligence contracts, but now we see consumer-facing companies opportunistically leaning into the void. OpenAI, for example, reportedly rushed to secure a major deal with the Pentagon almost immediately after Anthropic pushed back, though the memos note they later scrambled to tighten their own terms of service after facing a massive public backlash from their own safety researchers.
The implications of this fracture for the listener are profound. If you are investing your 401k in tech stocks, or if you are simply a professional utilizing these AI tools daily for your work, you need to understand that the utopian illusion of the borderless neutral internet is entirely dead. Moving forward, the physical geographic location of the servers running your AI, the complex geopolitical strings attached to the microchips processing your prompts, and the fundamental ethical stance of the corporations building the foundational models will directly dictate the capabilities and the future of the technology you rely on.
You are picking a side, whether you know it or not.
Precisely.
And while these tech titans are battling the Pentagon over the ethics of lethal AI, Segment 4 of our dossier takes us from the battlefields and boardrooms directly to college campuses. We are witnessing the absolute gamification of information. We are looking at a literal gold rush in prediction markets, specifically focusing on platforms like Kalshi and Polymarket.
The growth there is staggering.
It is. These platforms are aggressively, unapologetically targeting college students, and they are doing it through a fascinating regulatory loophole. Because the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC, currently regulates these prediction platforms as financial derivatives rather than traditional sports gambling or casino betting, the age restrictions are different. You only have to be 18 to open an account and wager, instead of the traditional 21.
The growth tactics deployed by these platforms are incredibly aggressive and highly targeted. Polymarket, for instance, has literally been offering to fully fund massive fraternity parties in exchange for guaranteed user signups and trading volume from the brothers. The intelligence notes one specific fraternity at Columbia University that reportedly raised over $30,000 from Polymarket in just 2 weeks, funding what they publicly described as an epic campus party.
$30,000 for a frat party.
Yes, they are sending branded beer pong tables to crypto clubs at UC Berkeley. They are hiring popular student influencers to make viral TikToks promoting the platforms, often blurring the lines of disclosure regarding the sponsorships. They are treating the campus like a massive, untapped liquidity pool.
But it's not just kids losing their monthly allowance on who will win the Oscars. This ecosystem has rapidly morphed into a massive, unregulated arena for potential insider trading. The sources detail an incredibly revealing, almost absurd incident at the University of Miami. Brothers at the Sigma Alpha Epsilon fraternity allegedly leveraged a personal connection to a student named Evan Whitesell, who happens to be the stepson of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos.
Wow.
They used this social connection to extract insider information on whether Bezos would be physically attending the upcoming Super Bowl, and they proceeded to bet heavily against his attendance on Kalshi.
It sounds like a college prank, but they successfully turned trivial, non-public, high society information into thousands of dollars of tax-free profit. But the flip side of that localized insider knowledge is the incredible systemic danger of the digital rumor mill. The Dossier highlights a counterexample. A completely false rumor originated in a Clemson University fraternity group chat claiming that actor Mark Wahlberg was guaranteed to attend the Super Bowl.
Completely made up.
Completely fabricated. That single, unverified rumor spread like wildfire across the country through interconnected Greek life group chats, resulting in a staggering $24 million being wagered on Polymarket based on a completely fabricated premise.
$24 million on a group chat rumor. The proponents of these prediction markets, usually venture capitalists, love to talk about the wisdom of crowds, this utopian idea that collective betting accurately aggregates human knowledge and flawlessly predicts the future. But the intelligence memo paints a vastly different, much darker picture.
Much darker.
It describes these platforms as a gray market intelligence feed driven almost entirely by the whispers of the well-connected and the speed of algorithms. And the geopolitical scale of this is breathtaking. It's not just celebrities. The blockchain analysis in our stack shows that anonymous wallets on Polymarket netted $1.2 million in pure profit by algorithmically front-running the breaking news of the U.S. military strike on Iran.
They were trading on the geopolitical event faster than traditional news desks could confirm the explosions. Naturally, the regulatory backlash is mobilizing, albeit slowly. Senators Amy Klobuchar and Jeff Merkley have introduced federal legislation attempting to restrict U.S. government officials from trading on these markets, citing the obvious conflict of interest.
Makes sense.
At the collegiate level, the NCAA is raising massive alarms. They are pointing out how this ecosystem dangerously blurs the line between sophisticated financial investing and degenerate gambling for a highly vulnerable demographic. It's already claiming careers. An athletic department worker at the University of Tennessee was recently fired after compliance officers discovered he was placing extensive wagers on Kalshi, including betting on the outcomes of his own school's football games.
For you, the listener, I want you to think about how this rampant gamification normalizes betting on real-world, often tragic events. Imagine telling your parents your tuition money is gone because you bet against Mark Wahlberg showing up to a football game, or worse, because you took the wrong side of a drone strike prediction. When an entire generation, Gen Z, is conditioned to view kinetic geopolitical strikes, celebrity movements, and Supreme Court decisions purely as vehicles for high-frequency derivative trading, it fundamentally alters the integrity of how we consume information.
It turns the news into a casino.
It turns the global news cycle into a casino, and that will undoubtedly rewrite the future mechanics of our financial markets.
This transition from the billions being wagered in digital casinos leads us directly into the harsh economic reality on the ground. While liquidity floods prediction markets, the average American consumer is buckling under immense compounding pressure. The economic intelligence in our stack highlights a severe escalating affordability crisis in the U.S. auto market.
It's brutal out there.
It is. The average transaction price of a new car is now hovering near $50,000. This has pushed the average monthly auto payment to an eye-watering $774.
$774 a month. That is historically what people paid for a starter home mortgage, and now it's just to lease a midsize SUV. And the financial engineering being used to hide that massive upfront cost is terrifying. Lenders are increasingly stretching auto loan terms out to 84 months, 7 years, just to make the monthly payment look palatable to the buyer.
It's a debt trap.
It's a toxic, unsustainable cocktail of historically high vehicle prices, elevated interest rates, and soaring insurance premiums. And this economic pressure isn't just hitting big-ticket luxury items, it's aggressively squeezing the value brands that middle-class consumers rely on. Look at the data we have on Texas Roadhouse.
A classic value brand.
Right. They built a massive corporate empire on the promise of an affordable, high-quality $19 steak dinner. But wholesale beef prices, which constitute over half of their total food costs, have skyrocketed by over a third in just the last 36 months. They are getting crushed by inflation, but they are terrified to raise menu prices because their hyper-price-sensitive customer base simply cannot absorb another hike.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the consumer discretionary sector, from cars to casual dining, is acting as a massive canary in the coal mine for stickier, long-term structural inflation. The post-pandemic, stimulus-fueled consumer spending boom has entirely evaporated. Major corporations are now desperate to protect their profit margins, and they're taking drastic, often deeply hidden structural risks to do so. A prime example from our financial intelligence stack is the strategic pivot of Lloyds Bank in the UK.
Lloyds Bank is a massive, incredibly old legacy institution, and they are pivoting hard. They recently announced a sweeping strategic overhaul to become the UK's biggest fintech. To achieve this valuation multiple, they have promised shareholders they will cut their core technology costs by a staggering 35% this year.
35% is a massive cut.
How do you cut that much overhead? By aggressively shutting down hundreds of legacy internal apps, and crucially, by automating their complex governance and compliance checks using AI. On top of that, to generate new revenue, they plan to drastically expand the sale of anonymized customer transaction data to third-party marketing businesses.
Now, the equity markets and the analysts might cheer the immediate cost-cutting narrative, but the intelligence analysts in our dossier heavily flagged this specific strategy as a massive, ticking value trap. Automating nuanced compliance protocols within a patchwork, decades-old legacy banking IT architecture carries catastrophic tail risk. Modern fintechs are built from the ground up to be automated. Legacy banks have layers of technical debt, ancient COBOL mainframes, patched together with modern APIs.
It's fragile.
A single hallucination or failure in their new automated systems could easily trigger devastating anti-money laundering, or know your customer AML KYC regulatory fines that would instantly wipe out a decade of the projected savings. Furthermore, aggressively monetizing vast troves of granular retail customer data invites intense hostile regulatory scrutiny. If that data anonymization process fails or is breached, the reputational damage for a bank older than the United States would be terminal.
It's incredible to contrast that sluggish, incredibly risky pivot of a massive legacy bank with the pure, ruthless agility of a small business operating in the same inflationary environment. The sources highlight a fascinating case study with a small company called Valvomax, which manufactures specialized oil change kits. Recently, the Supreme Court issued a ruling that temporarily invalidated a specific set of import tariffs.
The window was tiny.
Right. Within hours of the ruling, Valvomax instantly accelerated their massive manufacturing shipments from their partners in India to capitalize on the lower rates before the bureaucratic loophole closed, saving themselves $35,000 in pure overhead. They used speed and agility to perfectly navigate the whiplash of international trade policy, something a behemoth like Lloyd's could never execute.
And while small businesses hustle, we see entirely different, deeply hidden risks accumulating in high-end wealth management. The Financial Times reports included in our stack detail how UBS, currently the world's second-largest wealth manager, has been quietly striking massive fee-sharing agreements with giant private equity firms like Carlyle and CVC Capital Partners. UBS is essentially taking a secret cut of the lucrative performance fees from the very private equity funds that it heavily recommends to its retail and high-net-worth clients.
So, what does this all mean for the investor? It raises massive, glaring conflict of interest red flags across the entire wealth management industry. If you are a client at UBS, you have to ask, is my wealth manager recommending this specific illiquid private equity fund because it's objectively the best investment vehicle for my retirement portfolio, or are they pushing it because the bank is secretly getting a massive slice of the performance pie on the back end?
It's a valid question.
The brands and the legacy financial institutions you historically rely on are under intense existential pressure to maintain their margins. Your personal transaction data is increasingly being viewed as a monetizable lifeboat for struggling legacy banks, and your investment portfolio might be generating hidden fees for your broker. This means you, as a consumer and an investor, have to be more vigilant than ever about who holds your information, how they are monetizing it, and exactly how your financial advisors are being compensated.
For our final segment, we are shifting gears entirely, moving from the risks of legacy finance to the incredible possibilities of frontier science and the hidden alpha in biotech. The sources include dense data on several newly awarded NIH grants that are funding revolutionary paradigm-shifting approaches to both medicine and genomic data management. One of the most significant grants is funding the widespread development of federated learning methods, specifically for cross-ancestry genomic analysis.
I saw this term federated learning heavily referenced in the NIH grants, and to a layperson, it sounds like pure Silicon Valley jargon. What does that actually mean for my highly sensitive medical and genetic data?
It's actually a brilliant solution to a massive privacy bottleneck.
Yeah.
Let me use an analogy. Imagine you want to bake the ultimate perfect cake, but the secret crucial ingredients are held by 1,000 different master chefs scattered around the world, and none of them are willing to share their proprietary recipes.
Okay, I follow.
Historically, in data science, you would try to force everyone to bring all their sensitive ingredients to one massive, central, highly vulnerable kitchen, a central server to mix them. But with federated learning, instead of moving the data, you send the oven and the instructions out to the 1,000 individual kitchens.
Oh, that's smart.
The chefs bake the cake locally using their secret ingredients, and only the final result, the mathematical learnings and the improved algorithm, is sent back to the central hub. Federated learning allows researchers to train sophisticated AI models on diverse, global populations without ever centralizing, moving, or exposing the highly sensitive raw genetic data of the patients.
That is incredible. It completely circumvents the data privacy issue.
The implications for global health are vast. Current genomic datasets are heavily problematically skewed toward European ancestry, which creates massive systemic health disparities when AI diagnostic models are trained primarily on that homogeneous data. Federated learning mathematically solves the privacy problem, allowing algorithms to safely learn from incredibly diverse, underrepresented global populations. This effectively establishes privacy-preserving AI as the new federal standard for medical research.
That's a huge shift.
And from an investment standpoint, it perfectly explains why the financial intelligence notes that software companies specializing in zero-trust secure identity management companies like Okta are seeing their total addressable markets absolutely explode. They're the ones selling the digital picks and shovels required to secure these massive distributed AI networks.
We're also looking at breakthrough, ground-level research in infectious diseases. There is a fascinating NIH grant investigating a long-standing medical mystery, why people living with HIV who unfortunately also contract tuberculosis have such catastrophically high mortality rates. The new research conclusively shows that the TB co-infection induces a state of chronic, severe exhaustion in the patient's T cells.
Cellular exhaustion.
Right. This biological exhaustion allows the HIV virus to aggressively expand and create a larger, significantly stickier reservoir of latent virus that integrates right into the host's fundamental DNA.
And that latent reservoir is the primary defining barrier to an actual functional cure for HIV.
Yeah.
It's why patients must remain on antiretrovirals for life. But the researchers aren't just identifying the problem, they are attacking it. The intelligence synthesis combines this specific grant finding with another grant focused on developing novel, nanoparticle adjuvanted mRNA vaccines.
mRNA, like the COVID vaccines.
Similar platform, yes. They are actively testing whether this incredibly advanced mRNA delivery platform, similar to what was scaled during the pandemic, can be used therapeutically to reverse that specific T-cell exhaustion and actively, permanently deplete the HIV reservoir. If these trials are successful, it fundamentally moves mRNA technology from simply preventing acute respiratory diseases to functionally curing incredibly complex, chronic viral infections in deeply immunocompromised patients. It would rewrite infectious disease protocols globally.
And speaking of the economics of cures, the intelligence dossier heavily flags a biotech company called Sangamo Therapeutics. They have successfully developed a one-time functional gene therapy cure for Fabry disease, a devastating genetic disorder. But if you look at their stock, the broader market is heavily, almost aggressively discounting their valuation. Why? Because traditional pharmaceutical valuation models rely entirely on the recurring revenue model, treating a patient's chronic symptoms forever with a daily pill or a monthly infusion.
Exactly. The legacy pharma model is built on subscriptions. An enzyme replacement therapy for a condition like Fabry requires the patient, or their insurance, to buy the exceptionally expensive drug continuously for the rest of their life. A genuine, one-time cure breaks that financial model entirely. The biotech analysts in our dossier argue that Wall Street continually misprices the economics of genetic cures.
They just don't know how to value it.
A highly effective, one-time treatment allows the biotech company to capture a massive portion of the patient's lifetime treatment cost up front in a single payment. The true long-term addressable market for these frontier gene therapies is vastly underestimated by conventional, backwards-looking financial models that can only comprehend recurring revenue.
These aren't just obscure, highly technical medical trials happening in a sterile vacuum. They represent a fundamental, incoming paradigm shift in how human identity, absolute data privacy, and previously incurable chronic diseases will be managed and monetized in your lifetime.
It really is a remarkable convergence of advanced biology and complex code.
Let's take a deep breath and recap the incredible, sprawling journey we've just been on. We started in the volatile waters of the Strait of Hormuz, watching a billionaire shipping magnate turn off his transponders to dodge drones and cash in on a historic tanker supercycle. We saw how the aggressive rhetoric of the Trump administration and Iran's sophisticated AI-generated propaganda are actively rewriting the rules of modern asymmetric warfare and shattering global trust.
We covered a lot of ground.
We looked at the techno-nationalist walls rapidly going up around the U.S. AI industry and the profound ethical lines being drawn by safety labs like Anthropic against the immense pressure of the Pentagon. We watched frat boys leverage insider celebrity gossip into thousands of dollars on Polymarket, turning the geopolitical news cycle into a gamified casino.
The gamification of news.
We unpacked the crushing, relentless consumer squeeze in the auto market and the hidden, potentially catastrophic tail risks that legacy banks are taking with your anonymized data to protect their margins. And finally, we explored how the brilliant mathematics of federated learning and the biology of mRNA nanoparticles are quietly, radically paving the way for one-time genetic cures that break the traditional pharmaceutical business model.
As we synthesize all of this disparate intelligence into a cohesive picture, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over, drawing directly on the intersection of these diverse signals. We've seen how sophisticated algorithms are increasingly dictating both high-stakes military targeting decisions and high-speed financial trading. We've also seen the rapid, undeniable rise of state-sponsored, highly convincing AI deepfakes deployed in active war zones, and the explosion of unregulated prediction markets that react instantly, algorithmically, to mere rumors.
It's all connected.
So what happens when a truly sophisticated, state-level AI-generated deepfake of a massive geopolitical crisis, say, a hyper-realistic simulated strike on a critical energy choke point like Ras Tanura is released into the wild? What happens when that single, entirely synthetic piece of fake intelligence manages to trigger an automated, lethal military response and a cascading algorithmic global market crash simultaneously? When the raw speed of synthetic AI-generated information fundamentally outpaces the human capacity for verification and restraint, who or what is actually at the wheel?
That is a chilling and, frankly, incredibly vital question to consider as we watch these systems become more entwined. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and trusting us to unpack this massive stack of intelligence. Keep questioning the narratives around you, stay rigorously curious, and we will catch you next time.